Before modern comfort, the bedroom wasn't a safe space. It was cold, public, dangerous, and full of insane rules nobody questioned. People slept with animals, weapons, strangers, servants, demons in their heads, and sometimes an audience. This video exposes 44 bizarre things people did in the bedroom before modern life. And once you hear them, you'll never complain about your mattress again. 1. A royal wedding night in Europe was basically a government-sanctioned spectator sport with zero chill. The bedding ceremony required a rowdy mob of drunk guests, priests, and musicians to march the couple directly into the bedroom to make sure they actually got under the covers. It gets weirder because guests would play a game where they threw their stockings at the bride and groom. Hitting them was considered good luck. In some courts, the nobles refused to leave and just stood there watching to ensure the marriage was legally consummated. Imagine trying to have the most intimate moment of your life while your creepy uncle and the archbishop are standing at the foot of the bed keeping score. 2. If you were broke in Victorian London, your bedroom was literally a rope stretched across a room. In a nightmare called the two-penny hang, homeless people paid a small fee to sit on a bench and drape their upper bodies over a thick rope like wet laundry. It looks as comfortable as sleeping on a fence, but that is not the craziest part. The wake-up call was brutal because the landlord didn't use an alarm. He just cut the rope at one end at dawn. Everyone would instantly faceplant onto the floor in a pile of limbs. It was the most aggressive morning routine ever invented, but at least nobody ever overslept when their face hit the concrete. 3. Colonial teenagers were forced into the most frustrating dating setup in history called bundling. Because firewood cost more than gold, parents told young lovers to jump into bed together to stay warm, which sounds like a trap. To stop the inevitable raging hormones, they shoved a giant wooden plank called a bundling board right between them, or literally tied the girl inside a sack like a piece of laundry. Parents actually thought a piece of wood would stop teenagers from doing what teenagers do. Considering how many babies were born conveniently early back then, that board was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. 4. We complain when our heating bill goes up, but aristocratic families had a much cheaper and more dehumanizing way to warm up their sheets called the human bed warmer. Before hopping into a freezing cold bed in a stone castle, a lord would order a servant to strip down to their underwear and lie in the master's spot for 20 minutes. The servant's job was literally to act as a biological sponge, absorbing the damp chill with their own body heat so the rich guy didn't have to suffer the inconvenience of cold toes. It is the ultimate flex of laziness to use a living, breathing human being as a disposable electric blanket. 5. Our ancestors treated a good night's sleep like a chaotic sandwich with a very weird filling. Instead of sleeping through the night like normal people, everyone practiced biphasic sleep, where they woke up dead in the middle of the night for a scheduled intermission. This wasn't insomnia, it was a party. The whole village would wake up at 2 a.m. to pray, gossip with neighbors, or frantically try to make babies because doctors claimed it was the magic hour for biology. We panic if we wake up once, but these guys were treating sleep like a double feature movie where the halftime show involved doing chores in the dark. 6. Privacy in a hotel is a modern luxury because back in the day, booking a room just meant renting a slice of a mattress next to a stranger. You had to cuddle up with random travelers who probably smelled like a barn, which led to the weirdest slumber party in American history. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams once had to share a tiny bed and spent the whole night fighting like an old married couple. Adams was terrified the air would kill him, while Franklin was obsessed with fresh air and lectured him until Adams literally passed out from boredom. It is hilarious to think the founding fathers were just two grumpy dudes arguing about a window. 7. Before the invention of annoying alarm clocks, the only way to ensure you didn't get fired for oversleeping was to hire a human alarm known as a knocker-upper. These guys walked the streets at dawn, holding massive bamboo poles to tap on your second-story bedroom window, or they used pea shooters to fire dried peas at the glass until you finally woke up. It sounds like a neighborhood prank, but it was a serious profession where you paid a stranger to harass you every morning. The most mind-blowing part of this system is the logical paradox it creates. Who woke up the knocker-upper? Historians say they just stayed up all night, which means the workforce relied on a sleep-deprived guy armed with a pocket full of dried vegetables. 8. We think modern skincare routines are excessive, but famous historical beauty icons like Empress Sisi of Austria took it to a psychotic level. She would often sleep with a mask made of raw veal or crushed strawberries covering her face to prevent wrinkles, which basically means she went to bed looking like the clearance section of a grocery store. Other fashionable women slept wearing gloves filled with almond paste or coated their faces in lead-based paint that slowly poisoned them overnight. Imagine trying to get some rest while lying next to someone who smells like a butcher shop and is wearing a literal meat mask in the name of beauty. 9. 18th century women had hairstyles so massive and complex that going to bed became a logistical nightmare involving cages. The hair was styled using beef lard and could stay up for weeks, so to keep the shape while sleeping, women had to rest their necks on wooden blocks instead of pillows. The smell of the beef fat in their hair was so potent that it attracted mice and insects, so women had to sleep with small wire cages around their heads to stop rats from nesting in their wigs overnight. It is hard to feel romantic when you have to sleep inside a protective fortress just to keep the local wildlife from eating your hairdo. 10. Long before social distancing was a thing, medieval knights and ladies practiced the most extreme form of celibacy, known as sleeping with the sword of chastity. If an unmarried couple had to share a bed due to a lack of space at an inn, they would place a naked, razor-sharp broadsword directly between them on the mattress. The logic was that the fear of slicing your own arm off would overpower any romantic urges you might have. It is the most aggressive friend zone move in history. Imagine trying to get comfortable and relax when one wrong move to the left means you accidentally impale yourself on a piece of lethal military hardware. 11. We love sinking into a soft mattress today, but for centuries, sleeping flat on your back was considered a literal death wish. People in the Middle Ages and Renaissance were terrified that lying horizontally would allow blood to pool in the head and cause a stroke, or worse, make the demons think you were a corpse ready for possession. To avoid accidental death by comfort, they slept almost sitting up, propped against a mountain of stiff pillows in a semi-upright position. It looked less like resting and more like they were waiting for a bus. This explains why historical beds are often surprisingly short. They didn't need the leg room because they were basically sleeping in a permanent stomach crunch to trick the Grim Reaper. 12. Central heating is a miracle we take for granted because the medieval solution for a freezing bedroom was to simply invite the barn animals inside. Peasant families would frequently sleep in the same room as their cows, pigs, or chickens during the winter months because a 1,000-pound cow acts like a giant breathing radiator. While it sounds cozy to snuggle up with nature, imagine the smell of a wet barn combined with a small, unventilated bedroom. You were literally sleeping next to your breakfast and your lawnmower. It was a brilliant survival strategy for staying warm, but it definitely ruined any chance of romance when your cow decided to moo at 3 in the morning right next to your ear. 13. Those fancy canopy beds with the 4 posts and heavy curtains look incredibly romantic and royal in movies, but they were invented for a much grosser reason than interior design. In the old days, roofs were often made of thatched straw, which was a perfect home for bugs, birds, and rats that would occasionally lose their grip and fall on your face while you slept. The canopy was literally a debris shield designed to catch falling droppings and vermin before they landed in your open mouth. So when you see a beautiful antique 4-poster bed, just remember that the elegant fabric roof was originally there to serve as a designated poop catcher, so the lord and lady didn't wake up covered in ceiling surprise. 14. If you look at old paintings of men in bed, they are almost always wearing a ridiculous floppy nightcap that makes them look like a confused Santa Claus. This wasn't a brave fashion statement. It was a desperate attempt to keep their head warm because stone castles were basically giant refrigerators at night. But there is a grosser layer to this trend involving lice. Since hygiene was totally optional back then, many men shaved their heads to avoid nasty lice infestations and wore the cap to cover their bald, freezing domes. It is hard to imagine a knight in shining armor looking tough when he goes to bed, wearing a pointy little sock on his head. But hypothermia does not care how manly you are. 15. Before we had electric blankets to keep us cozy, people used a terrifying invention called a bed warmer, which was basically a metal pan filled with live coals and fire. You would slide this scorching hot copper skillet between your linen sheets to heat them up before hopping in, which sounds like a game of Russian roulette with your house. It was shockingly common for the embers to spill out and turn the entire bed into a bonfire while the family was fast asleep. It is genuinely amazing that anyone survived the winter without roasting themselves, but apparently, the risk of burning down the entire neighborhood was acceptable just to avoid touching a cold mattress for 5 seconds. 16. If you hate having to walk to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you might actually envy the gross convenience of the chamber pot. Instead of plumbing, people kept a ceramic bowl full of human waste directly under the bed where they slept. The smell must have been absolutely eye-watering, yet they just lived with it all night long like it was a potpourri bowl. The real danger came in the morning when they had to empty it. In crowded cities, lazy residents would simply open the bedroom window and hurl the contents into the street below, often shouting a warning that usually came 2 seconds too late for the unfortunate pedestrians walking underneath. 17. Privacy was such a foreign concept that wealthy nobles often slept with their servants in the room, but on a humiliating piece of furniture called a truckle bed. This was a tiny low bed on wheels that slid underneath the master's giant bed during the day and was pulled out at night like a drawer. The servant would sleep practically on the floor at the foot of the master's bed, ready to wake up instantly if the lord needed a drink of water or a midnight snack. It is hard to imagine having a good night's sleep when your boss is snoring 3 feet above your head and could literally step on you if he got up on the wrong side of the mattress. 18. In parts of rural France and Scotland, farmers decided that open beds were too airy, so they started sleeping inside cupboards called box beds. These were literal wooden cabinets with doors that you would climb into and shut tight, sealing yourself inside like you were shipping yourself to another country. While it kept the body heat in, it also meant you were breathing the same stale air all night in a coffin-sized box. They were often used to protect sleepers from wolves or wandering livestock entering the house, but mostly it looks like they were voluntarily sleeping in an upright wardrobe just to prove they could sleep through severe claustrophobia. 19. The phrase "good night, sleep tight" is not just a cute rhyme your grandma told you. It was a literal instruction manual for operating heavy machinery. Before springs were invented, mattresses rested on a grid of ropes that would stretch and sag until you were folded like a human taco. You had to use a special tool called a bed key to physically crank and tighten the ropes every single night just to get a flat surface. It sounds like way too much manual labor just to go to sleep, but if you were too lazy to sleep tight, you would wake up with a spine shaped like a banana. It was basically like sleeping in a hammock made of shoelaces that required daily mechanic work, just so you didn't roll into the center and get trapped. 20. If you have ever woken up unable to move, we know today it is called sleep paralysis, but our ancestors were convinced it was a literal monster sitting on their chest. They called this creature a nightmare, which wasn't a horse but a heavy goblin or demon that crushed the air out of you while you slept. This terrified people so much that they hung hag stones or iron knives over their beds to scare the invisible goblins away. It is actually kind of hilarious that the origin of the word nightmare comes from a collective belief that a small, heavy gremlin was using your ribcage as a park bench, and the only cure was hanging a rock on your wall. 21. Home security systems did not exist back in the day, so the average person's solution to intruders was to turn their bed into a deadly armory. It was standard practice for men to sleep with a bed dagger, or even a small sword tucked right under their pillow or mattress for quick access. 16th century travel guides actually recommended checking your sheets for bugs, and then placing your loaded pistol within arm's reach before blowing out the candle. It seems incredibly dangerous to mix deep sleep with lethal weapons, especially if you have bad dreams, but apparently, the fear of burglars was stronger than the risk of accidentally stabbing yourself while fluffing the pillow. 22. Superstition turned the space under the bed into a weird storage unit for magical objects meant to ward off evil spirits. Instead of dust bunnies, people would place a sharp iron axe or a bowl of water beneath the mattress to cut bad energy or catch wandering demons before they could grab your ankles. Pregnant women were even told to sleep with a knife under the bed to protect the baby from evil, which sounds like the least child-proof safety advice in the history of parenting. It is wild to think that people slept soundly, knowing there were sharp farm tools and bowls of mystery liquid just inches away from their sleeping bodies. 23. We close our blinds today because the streetlights are annoying, but our ancestors sealed their bedrooms like bank vaults because they were terrified of the moon. People genuinely believed that sleeping with moonlight hitting your face would cause lunacy, which is literally where the word comes from, or that it would twist your facial features while you dreamt. They would sleep with heavy wooden shutters and thick velvet curtains closed tight, even in the sweltering heat of summer, to block out the poisonous lunar beams. It is hilarious to think of a tough medieval warrior suffocating in a pitch-black, airless room just because he was afraid the moon might give him a crooked nose or make him go crazy. 24. If you complain about your mattress being too firm, just remember that for centuries, the average bed was basically a large sack filled with loose straw and corn husks. This organic stuffing was a literal playground for fleas, lice, and mice, meaning your bed was essentially a small zoo that you slept on top of. The phrase, "don't let the bed bugs bite," wasn't a cute rhyme. It was a serious warning because the bugs inside the mattress would get hungry at night. People had to drag their mattresses outside and beat them with sticks just to disturb the colonies of insects living inside, which gives a whole new horrifying meaning to the phrase, "hit the hay." 25. Before we had adjustable thermostats, people measured the coldness of the night in units of dogs. In a practice that gave us the phrase, "three-dog night," people would pack as many dogs as possible into the bed to act as living, breathing hot water bottles during the winter. If it was chilly, you grabbed one dog. If it was freezing, you needed a three-dog pileup on top of the quilt. It sounds cute until you realize you were sharing a small bed with three wet, smelly farm animals that definitely had fleas and probably didn't understand the concept of personal space. It was a cozy survival strategy, but your bedroom definitely smelled like a wet kennel every morning. 26. In the days before electricity, using a candle to read in bed was the #1 way to accidentally burn your house down. So people invented a chaotic alarm clock using fire. To wake up early without a mechanical clock, they would stick a metal nail into the side of a candle at a specific mark and light the wick before going to sleep. When the wax melted down to that point, the nail would fall out and clang loudly onto a metal plate sitting below, startling the sleeper awake. It was a clever idea, but relying on an open flame to melt its way toward a heavy metal object while you're unconscious seems like a great way to wake up to a heart attack or a pile of ash. 27. We think of the bedroom as a private sanctuary, but in medieval great halls, privacy was absolutely non-existent because everyone slept in one giant pile. The lord and lady might have a private box, but the servants, knights, and guests would just crash on the floor of the main hall together, often using their shields as pillows and their cloaks as blankets. It was basically an adult slumber party that never ended, where you had to sleep listening to 50 other people snoring, coughing, and talking in their sleep. If you were a light sleeper, your only option was to just stare at the ceiling and listen to the symphony of bodily noises coming from the army of people passed out on the floor around you. 28. Before modern vacuum cleaners made cleaning easy, making a bed was essentially a combat sport that required a heavy wooden weapon called a bedstaff. This was a thick stick that usually stayed tucked into the bed frame, and while it looked like a tool for fighting off burglars, its real purpose was much more mundane. You had to use this club to violently beat the lumps out of your straw mattress and smooth down the sheets because the filling would bunch up into rock-hard mountains overnight. It is hilarious to imagine a calm morning routine that starts with someone grabbing a giant stick and aggressively thrashing their own bed like it owes them money just to get the wrinkles out. 29. If you think wearing the same pajamas for 2 days in a row is gross, you would not survive a pre-modern winter. In really cold climates, people didn't just put on warm clothes for bed, they literally sewed themselves into their long woolen underwear for the entire season. The idea was to trap body heat in and keep the cold air out, so once that needle and thread did its work in November, you were stuck inside that fabric cocoon until the spring thaw. You were basically a human fermented pickle, marinating in your own sweat and skin flakes for 4 months straight because taking it off to bathe was considered a dangerous health risk. 30. Victorian gentlemen had some truly disgusting habits, but the worst one has to be the bedside spittoon. Chewing tobacco was incredibly popular, and apparently, the urge to spit didn't stop just because you were tucked in for the night. Instead of getting up, men kept a brass bowl right next to their pillow, so they could lean over and launch a glob of tobacco juice into it in the dark. It required impressive aim to hit a small metal target from a horizontal position with the lights out. The thought of missing the bowl and hitting the carpet, or worse, your sleeping partner, is enough to make you grateful that chewing tobacco went out of style for interior decoration. 31. We complain when our electric blanket has a cold spot, but our ancestors were literally sleeping with construction materials to stay warm. If you couldn't afford a fancy metal warming pan, the budget solution was to take a heavy brick or a large stone, roast it in the fireplace until it was scorching hot, wrap it in a piece of flannel, and shove it to the bottom of the bed. You were essentially cuddling with a piece of hot masonry all night. It worked, but if your foot accidentally slipped out from under the covers and touched the unwrapped part of the brick, you would wake up with a third-degree burn from your own heater. 32. Before banks were trusted or even accessible to normal people, the safest place for your life savings was directly underneath your spine. People didn't just trust the mattress because it was close. They would literally slice open the fabric and stuff gold coins and jewelry deep inside the straw or feathers. This gives a whole new meaning to lumpy mattress because you were physically sleeping on top of your retirement fund. It sounds secure until you realize that if your house caught fire, which happened constantly back then, you didn't just lose your home. You lost your entire net worth because your bank account was highly flammable and currently on fire. 33. If you have a partner who snores like a tractor, you probably just nudge them or sleep on the couch. But our ancestors chose violence to solve the problem. During the Revolutionary War era, a popular cure for snoring was to sew a hard wooden ball or even a small iron cannonball into the back of the snorer's nightshirt. The logic was simple and brutal. If the person tried to roll onto their back, which is the prime position for snoring, they would land on a rock-hard lump and wake up in immediate pain. It was basically a torture device disguised as pajamas, forcing the sleeper to stay on their side all night or suffer the consequences of sleeping on a literal weapon. 34. We freak out if we see a single spider in the bedroom, but people in the past knew their beds were infested and decided to negotiate with the bugs using decoys. They used devices called flea traps, which were small, hollow tubes made of ivory or wood that were placed inside the bed sheets or worn around the neck. The inside was coated with sticky resin or a small piece of bloody meat to attract the fleas away from the human body and into the tube. You were essentially sleeping with a piece of bait next to your pillow, hoping the insects would prefer the snack inside the box rather than feasting on your legs while you dreamt. 35. Married couples today argue in the car or the kitchen, but in the Victorian era, they formalized nagging into a specific bedtime ritual called the curtain lecture. Since beds were enclosed by heavy velvet drapes, once the couple was inside and the candle was out, the husband was trapped in a dark fabric box with no escape. Wives famously used this captive opportunity to lecture their husbands about their financial failures, bad manners, or lack of ambition for hours. It became such a cultural phenomenon that books were written about it, proving that the scariest thing in history wasn't a ghost, but being sealed in a small tent with someone who remembers every mistake you made in 1845. 36. For royalty, the bedtime routine involved a lot less face washing and a lot more stabbing to ensure survival. Paranoid kings and queens were terrified that an assassin might be hiding inside the bedding, so they forced a servant to perform a nightly bed search. This wasn't just looking under the pillows. The servant had to physically roll around on the mattress to trigger any hidden traps or use a dagger to stab through the straw and feathers to check for hidden enemies. It is hard to feel relaxed and ready for sleep after watching a guy violently attack your mattress with a knife, just to make sure it is empty. 37. While we might stay in bed all day only when we are sick or hungover, French aristocratic women turned laziness into a high-status social event called the Ruelle. Stylish ladies would hold entire salons and receive important guests while lying in bed, fully dressed in elaborate nightgowns and propped up by pillows. Visitors would squeeze into the narrow space between the bed and the wall to gossip and discuss politics, while the hostess held court from under the duvet. It was the ultimate power move to force distinguished men to stand awkwardly in your bedroom while you lounged around in luxury, proving that you didn't even have to stand up to run the social scene. 38. Dating apps are frustrating, but single women in the past had a much messier way to find a husband involving baked goods. It was a widespread superstition that if a bridesmaid took a piece of the wedding cake, wrapped it in a napkin, and slept with it directly under her pillow, she would dream of her future husband. In reality, this just meant sleeping on a lumpy, crumbling dessert all night. You were basically inviting every ant and cockroach in the house into your bed for a midnight snack. It is hard to have romantic dreams about your soulmate when you wake up with sticky frosting in your hair and crumbs in your ears, but apparently, ruining your bedding was a small price to pay for a supernatural Tinder match. 39. Sleepwalking is treated with medicine or safety gates today, but the historical cure was basically a slapstick comedy routine waiting to happen. Families dealing with a chronic sleepwalker would place a large tub of freezing cold water directly beside the bed on the floor. The logic was that when the person tried to wander off in the middle of the night, they would step into the icy bucket and shock themselves awake instantly. It was a crude and effective alarm system, but it also guaranteed that the sleepwalker would slip and fall onto the floor while screaming in a wet panic. It seems a bit cruel to prank your own family members while they are unconscious, but nobody walks in their sleep after taking an accidental ice bath for the third time in a week. 40. We think a king-size bed is luxurious, but it is nothing compared to the legendary Great Bed of Ware built in Elizabethan England. This wooden monstrosity was over 10 feet wide and could reportedly sleep 15 people at the same time comfortably. It became such a famous tourist attraction that travelers would carve their names into the wood and pay money, just to say they squeezed into it with a dozen strangers. It was basically the clown car of furniture. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep when you are sandwiched between 14 other people, half of whom are drunk tourists trying to carve graffiti into the headboard while you're trying to take a nap. 41. Air conditioning is the greatest invention ever, but before it existed, people in hot tropical climates invented a fake spouse called a Dutch wife to stay cool. This wasn't a person, but a long, hollow tube made of bamboo or wicker that you would hug with your arms and legs while you slept. The open weave allowed air to circulate between your limbs and the bed, preventing you from getting sweaty and sticky in the humidity. It sounds practical until you realize you are essentially cheating on your partner with a wicker basket. It must have been very confusing for visitors to walk into a bedroom and see someone passionately cuddling a piece of bamboo furniture just to avoid heat stroke. 42. Coffee is the universal morning fuel today, but in the 17th century, the preferred way to wake up was to violently attack your own nose. Instead of brewing espresso, many people kept a box of snuff, which is powdered tobacco, right on the nightstand. The moment they opened their eyes, they would snort a pinch of this dust to trigger a massive, uncontrollable sneezing fit. The idea was that the violent physical convulsion of sneezing would shake the sleep out of your brain and get the blood pumping immediately. It is honestly the most aggressive morning routine imaginable. You are literally forcing your body to have a mini seizure just to verify that you are actually awake. 43. Victorian men were so obsessed with their facial hair that they turned bedtime into a torture scene with a device called the mustache trainer. To ensure their handlebar mustaches didn't droop or get messy while they slept, guys would strap a leather or metal clamp across their face that locked their hair into a perfect curl. Overnight, they essentially went to bed looking like Hannibal Lecter just to have a fancy mustache in the morning. It is hard to imagine maintaining a happy marriage when you roll over in the middle of the night and see your husband wearing a miniature face cage that makes him look like he is undergoing primitive dental surgery, all in the name of looking dapper for work. 44. For centuries, people would lie awake in terror, listening to a rhythmic tapping sound coming from their wooden headboards, convinced it was a supernatural countdown to their demise. They called it the Death Watch, believing the clicking was the Grim Reaper's clock, ticking down the seconds until someone in the house died. The reality is practically a sitcom plot. The noise was actually made by a tiny beetle banging its head against the wood to attract a mate. Our ancestors spent sleepless nights paralyzed by the fear of upcoming doom, praying for salvation, while a horny bug was literally just headbanging inside their furniture trying to get a date. Now be honest, after all this, which one would actually break you? Not which is weird, but which one would make you lose your mind by night 3? Sleeping with strangers, animals, weapons, no privacy, no heat? Pick one and defend your choice in the comments, or call someone else out for being weak. If this video made modern life feel earned, hit like. Subscribe, because the past gets way darker and we're not sugarcoating it.